Hi, I'm Sally-Shakti and I help you to thrive while you're writing. And it's Friday, so this is my live on Utopian Poetics. I'm wearing my new moon dress because I'm celebrating a very special new moon announcement that I'm going to share with you just now. And it's the publication date for the anthology of Utopian Poetics, Writing Utopia 2020, that I'm co-editing with Sarah Scott-Thorne at Hester Glock Press. So on 21st of June 2020, that's the summer solstice, we will be launching the new anthology, Writing Utopia 2020. Summer solstice feels like a great and really appropriate and powerful date for launching this anthology. If you're following astrology or any of the sort of astrological energies that are around at the moment and that we're cycling through this year, you might be aware, or you might hear that the summer solstice this year is going to have some particularly potent and powerful energies around it. There are a lot of alignments and conjunctions coming into place this year. So it feels like a really powerful time to launch this anthology. It's also 1 year on exactly from the original submission deadline that we set. So it feels pretty good to be bringing the book together and getting it out on a really powerful date. So the anthology is a collection of, I think, 45 contributors writing in and around what I've been calling Utopian Poetics. It's been an interesting journey to bring this book together. So I've been working with the idea of Utopian Poetics since late 2014 when I was doing my Masters at University of Sussex. And I took the project through to my PhD, which I started in 2015 at the University of Westminster, and submitted the thesis last year and had my viva in December. I'm actually just about to complete the corrections on that for a very, very close deadline on 1st of May. So I'm really beginning to become immersed in this project again after a little bit of time off at the start of this year, which I needed to just regather myself after completing the 50,000 words and 4 books of poetry that I submitted for my PhD project. It was a big undertaking, as well as beginning to put this anthology together. So early last year, 2019, Sarah and I put a call out for, first of all, invited contributions and then wider submissions for the Writing Utopia anthology. At the time, I was heavily immersed in the project myself, but I really didn't know what interest there would be from other writers, particularly. In a way, the political situation and the politics that many of the writers I knew were responding to gave me a sense that perhaps utopia was not something that people wanted to engage with or take particularly seriously. Living with the day-to-day attrition of austerity, looming Brexit, there was Trump's politics in the US, climate crisis, and global conditions really not conducive to the idea of thinking that things could possibly be any better, although they certainly at the time didn't feel like they could be much worse. So I was really encouraged when people began to submit their contributions for the project. And in the end, we had around 90 submissions, and we selected about half of those for the anthology. The selection process was a really interesting exercise, actually. It was a really interesting process to go through. Sarah and I met several times to look at the submissions and discuss our selections. I'm really interested in how that process played out, because it was a bit like creating our own utopia. The anthology itself obviously becomes a boundaried product or a boundaried space, a bit like a geographically boundaried space, and we had to select those submissions that we felt were a right fit to be within that boundaried space of the anthology. That felt like there were some real challenges with that, not only in terms of that there were some times that we didn't agree on certain things, mostly we did, but also just the sensation of being in that position, working with the topic of utopia, which I've always explored as being not a closed system. The kind of utopia that I'm interested in working with as a poet is a utopia of openness and multiplicity. So it was really important that this anthology brings together a wide range of diverse voices and styles and experiments and methods, because, as I said, for me, Utopian Poetics is about openness and possibility and multiplicity. It's not about a closed system where one person imposes the rules and the boundaries. So that created some productive tension in terms of making selections for the anthology. Suddenly we were in a position where, as editors, we were setting the boundaries for this project, and as much as I wanted there to be openness, the project had to have form, it had to have cohesion, and we were limited to a certain number of pages. So just the process of actually selecting entries and submissions for that brought about its own kind of conversations around the idea of utopia between Sarah and I as we were going through this process that I found really interesting. And the kinds of productive tensions between form and openness that I've been exploring in my poetry. So yeah, we've brought together the contributors, and we're really super happy and excited with how it's looking. Having just beginning to put the proofs together, I'm really excited by the visceral energy of the project. There's a real visual quality to it and a real visceral quality to it. And even just looking through the pages, lots of the work is very visual and experimental. Some of it is visual art, and much of it is very visual poetry, and different formal styles of writing. So just looking through the project already, I mean, this is on the laptop, it has a very visceral and visual quality to it, which I really appreciate in terms of Utopian Poetics. I've been speaking in the last couple of live sessions about the interaction between text and space on the page, and the ways that punctuation can be brought into play to create fragmentation and rhythm as a visceral embodiment of what I have experienced through meditation and yoga. So Utopian Poetics and Writing Utopia 2020 is a project that brings these elements into play from a range of different writers, a range of different voices, a range of different styles. And yeah, it's been really exciting to work on bringing that together. So what can you expect, and what do I want to say about the project? I think I began just now by saying that I wasn't sure how much interest or appetite there was going to be for Utopian Poetics at the time when I put the call out. And I feel that right now, Utopian Poetics is coming into its own time. It's coming into its right time. Though from certain perspectives, it certainly feels and seems like the world has become much more contracted than it was. I also sense a much greater openness for considering new possibilities, and much greater potential for recreating conditions, circumstances, rebirthing a new world from a very different perspective and a very different set of intentions than the current world, which is so clearly failing and crumbling. So whilst I don't have any predictions or particular attachment to particular outcomes, I am excited by the possibility that this time affords us, this time to really pause, let go perhaps of some of the old ways of doing things, and begin to reimagine, re-envision, recreate and co-create a very different looking world with a very different set of intentions, motivations, drivers, and directions. Co-creativity is at the heart of everything that I do with Utopian Poetics, and so again, you know, bringing together multiple voices, but also the ways that many, if not all, of the writers work within the anthology is in this opening up of space between self and other, writer and reader, text and space on the page, word and silence, and they do that in a whole range of different ways. What the effect is for me is to begin opening up this space of possibility between self and other that can be a very creative and co-creative space in which there is an invitation for both parties to be active participants. So this anthology of Utopian Poetics categorically is not a vision of how the world could be. It's not a narrative about creating a different world or about imagining that different world. What it does is, how it performs is it fundamentally at its heart opens up spaces of connectivity between people, between self and other, between writer and reader. And the ways that it does that is all the ways that Utopian Poetics performs, which I've been speaking about in previous sessions and I'll speak about in future sessions. Opening up that space, which for me is a space of breath, it's a space of meditation, it's a space of union, which is the root of the word yoga, which means yoke, yuj, to yoke. It's also central to the word communion. So this communication, this communion, this interconnectivity between self and other, that's what's at the heart of Utopian Poetics for me. And that's what each of the writers in the anthology is bringing to this space in different ways. So the invitation is for the reader to become active in co-creating meaning with the writer. And again, this plays into the idea of form and space, boundaries and openness. The text itself creates its own form, creates its own boundary. There is the infinite possibility of the blank page, but there is no creativity on that page. There is no creation on that page. Nothing is created on that page. So whilst there's the infinitely open possibility, there is no form. There is nothing that's been brought into reality. When the poem is created, it may not be the perfect and ideal poem that we all imagine we're going to write in our heads, but it is something that has been brought into form, and it interacts with the limitations of materiality. Once the poem comes into form, it becomes bound by materiality, it becomes constrained by the words that are used and their placement on the page. So there's a relationship between form and openness, or boundary and openness, which I've been talking about a lot in this session. And that also creates the possibility for communion, communication, interconnectivity between self and other. Each of us is a limited form. Each of us is a being in our own right, independent and individual, but we're also interconnected. And in my practices through yoga and meditation and tantra, there is the openness of the heart through breath, through awareness, through presence, through consciousness, in which that interconnected relationship can be experienced to an extent, and as I've said in previous episodes, we can never fully experience that because we are still materially bound and boundaried embodied beings, and that's the joy of creativity. The possibility for co-creation on this planet, in this material plane, is born from the fact that we are materially embodied beings. So I translate that into the way that the poem works on the page. There is this material embodiment. It's bound by the words and their positioning on the page. It has a form, it has boundaries, it has shape. But within that form and those boundaries and that shape is the openness for possibility and multiplicity. There's the openness to the others or the other. So there is the invitation from the writer to the reader to enter into the text and participate in the co-creation of meaning. And that really is at the heart of Utopian Poetics for me. And that is what each individual text within the anthology works at, and that's what the anthology itself as a whole is performing. As I've mentioned about the productive tensions of bringing together a boundaried anthology that has to have shape and form, but also works with the invitation towards multiplicity and openness, possibility. So I just want to mention a couple of interesting texts that embody Utopian Poetics in specific ways that I find interesting as well. You'll find in the anthology Anne Waldman's Questions for Citizens. And when I first heard Anne performing this poem in London last May, I was struck immediately by a sense that the question is an intrinsically utopian form. Anyone who's aware of Anne Waldman's work will know that she works a lot with experimenting with the long form poem, especially the litany or catalogue poem. Questions for Citizens is a litany of questions, and when there is that repetition of question after question after question, there is it becomes very evident that there is a call to the other. There's a call from the writer to the reader to participate, to interact, to be present, and to co-create meaning from this text. So there's openness in the text where there is space for the reader to respond and participate. So the question I find, especially in that litany form, particularly compelling as a piece of Utopian Poetics, and a very simple structure as well, that can be recreated and practiced. Just thinking maybe I'll do a workshop on that. I have a few workshop ideas brewing, which I'll announce later. I also wanted to talk about Sasha Akhtar's translation of Utopia of the Poets, because again, translation is an interesting aspect of Utopian Poetics, in which there is an implicit and productive interrelationship between self and other. Who is the author of that text? Ultimately, there is the original writer, Hijab Imtiaz, and then there is Sasha Akhtar's translation of that text. Then there is the productive tension between the ways that language works and can never fully be translated. All translation is approximate, it's invitation. And then there's the invitation to the reader to enter into that text and to interpret it. So I'm interested in the way that those layers work to open up possibilities between self and other, between writer and reader, and multiple writers in this case. Sarah Scottthorne's contribution, Generalist, is an amazing visual poem that works off of a set of botanical or I think it's insects actually, and I've forgotten the word for that. but to do with botanical distribution among insects. Again, her text is an appropriated text, and it's a found text, and again that brings questions of authorship, it brings questions of connectivity, interactivity. So these are the questions that are fundamental to utopian poetics, and they're not easily resolvable, but they do invite participation, they do invite co-creativity and interconnection, and they do invite participation. So there are many different texts and different ways of working in the anthology that I'm really excited about, and I don't have time to talk through them all right here, right now. But I will just finish by saying that it feels like, as I said, right now really feels like the time for utopian poetics, and in a way it feels like, you know, a really potent time for contemporary poetics in general. These lockdown conditions have really brought to my attention that one of the more common and prevalent ways in which many, if not all, of the writers within the anthology typically work and typically practice is through a personal and subjective engagement with constraint conditions, with objective conditions that are constrained, that have boundaries and that have form and limitations. So where that's taken me in my thinking is that a lot of the poems in this anthology and a lot of the poets and the way that they practice is to explore the creative possibilities within constraint conditions, and that I feel really is coming into its own within this time of lockdown, because that is an invitation to creative play that we can each respond to in our own way, whether or not you happen to be a writer or a poet. We're all invited at this time to find and respond to the creative opportunities, the creative possibilities within these limited and limiting constraint conditions of lockdown. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. There'll be more announcements about the anthology as it progresses, and some more announcements about some poetry workshops that I'll be running over the next few weeks and months. So stay tuned, and thanks for being here. And I hope you will enjoy more of what we do and more about the anthology as it comes. Namaste, and so much love.